Hey guys, Fox here, and today we're going to be doing the seventh installment of A Brief History of Original USFL Teams. And today we're going to be doing the team that is hosting the league this year in the Birmingham Stallions. So, the Birmingham Stallions were a franchise in the USFL, as you know, and they played all their home games at Alabama's Legion Field, which they are going to be playing some games this year as well. They competed in all three seasons of the USFL, and then during their run, they were one of the more popular teams, and they actually did seem like they had a chance to be a viable venture if the USFL had a better run. The owner was Cincinnati financier and Birmingham native Marvin Warner. The team's coach was Raleigh Dodge, who was previously an offensive line coach for the Steelers during their Super Bowl years, and he ended up with the second most wins in the USFL. The Stallions' starting quarterback for the final two seasons was Cliff Stout, a longtime backup to Terry Bradshaw with the Steelers. Stout had finally taken over for Bradshaw in '83, but he played really bad the second half of the season, and then people hated him. And so he ended up going to the Birmingham Stallions. And in 1984, his first year with the Stallions, they played the Pittsburgh Maulers, and that was the game where the Maulers famously had a sellout game and then pelted Stout with snowballs. Heading into the 1983 season, Warner was supposed to be an owner of the USFL's Washington franchise and the Federals, but when he found out there was a team in Birmingham, he decided to get that one instead. So they simply got a roster made very quick. They got 20 players from trades and waivers a week prior to their first game, and Dodge was able to try and make them into a pretty competitive team that finished 9-9. So, their biggest splash heading into the season was signing their first-round draft pick, Reggie Collie, out of Southern Mississippi. And then the rest of the Stallions are a bunch of, NFL reserves and college free agents. But one of the few pro guys they did sign that was a true veteran was center Tom Banks, who was from Birmingham, who had spent 10 years with the St. Louis Cardinals, starting 63 games for him. And he was mainly brought in by Dodge to be this mentor to the team. He would end up being there for another year and then would retire and then decided to be on the staff and coaching in '85. Some other NFL veterans that they did sign were Chiefs running back Earl Gant, running back Ken Talton for a couple games of the Lions, wide receiver kick returner Kevin Miller from the Vikings, Steve Stevens from the Jets, Robert Woods, who spent 8 years with the Jets and Saints as an offensive tackle, guard from the Packers, Buddy Idelette, Mike Reines, a defensive end who had spent 7 years with the Ottawa Rough Riders in the CFL, Reggie P. Lewis, who spent a couple years with the Buccaneers as a defensive lineman, linebacker Dallas Hickman, who spent 6 years with the Redskins, and Mike Thomas, cornerback, who had spent 6 years with the Redskins and Chargers, and Billy Sir, who spent 5 years with the Buccaneers, Dolphins, and Lions. Yeah, so a pretty random group of players, just saying. The Stallions, though, getting Collier and then some other players they drafted, it was okay. I mean, some of their guys did go on to do some stuff. Nose tackle Charles Martin would go on to play for the Packers and infamously tackled Jim McMahon in 1986 in Soldier Field, so that's pretty cool. And they did get some territorial draft selections in Jackie Klein and offensive tackle Pat Phoenix from Ole Miss. So, yeah. The Stallions also did sign a rookie free agent in Scott Norwood. And, yes, the wide right Scott Norwood. That's another pretty interesting factoid. So, as far as the season went, they dropped their opening game against the Michigan Panthers. But they did win their next game in an overtime win against Oakland to get their first win in franchise history. But after that, the team would end up starting 2-5, and their coach decided to make a move. So Dodge, before their sixth game, so during the skid, decided to sign former Steelers wide receiver Jim Smith. And he was supposed to add punch to a receiving core that didn't have any, and he did immediately. And then the turning point happened in Week 8 against the Invaders, again, when their backup Bobby Lane took the reins of the offense from Collier, who was struggling, and then Lane ended up winning their game, and then they won a few more games to end up being 7-5, but they finished their last 6 games going 2-4, which ended their season at 9-9 in 4th place in their division, which, by the way, was last. Um, the the reason they were last is because that was the division that had two teams go 12-6 and a team that went 11-7. So yeah, oof. The biggest game of the year was when they played the LA Express in front of 42,000 fans, and it had a bunch of families and members of local steel and ironworks. So that was pretty cool. And they did defeat them, as I said. And then the next week they would go on the road and beat the Michigan Panthers, who ended up going and winning the title. And it did come with a disputed touchdown about the Michigan defender spiking the ball when the play wasn't dead. So yeah, it was pretty weird, but yeah. Overall, the team finished with the most rushing yards in the league with 3,000, but their offense was 11th out of 12th due to just a really, really bad passing unit. And then late in the season, they announced the signing of Buffalo Bills running back Joe Cribbs, who would join the team in 1984, as he signed a 3-year deal. As for how they did in attendance and players, in attendance that year, they ended up being 7th out of 12th, so not great, but not terrible. They did get 22,000 fans a game, which is, I guess, okay. It's not the best in the world, but it still is a solid number. And then in terms of their players, they did have a couple players who actually made the All-League teams and the All-Star teams. Buddy Adelette, the guard, ended up being on both the All-League and All-Star team. And defensive end Mike Reines was also on both the Sporting News USFL All-Star team and the USFL All-League team. So they did have some solid players. That's pretty nice. So in 1984, they signed former Steelers backup quarterback Cliff Stout. They signed some other NFL veterans and running back Joe Cribb, as I mentioned, fullback Leon Perry, defensive end Dave Perefori, and then a CFL cornerback in Ricky Ray. And because of all those signings, they looked like they were going to be a much better team in 84. And Coach Dotch also shored up some other areas by adding a bunch of college free agents and stuff like Chuck Clanton, who helped become one of the main keys in their defense becoming good. So the team also used a nickel formation that featured 2 linebackers and 5 defensive backs, one of the first defenses to ever really use it in the USFL. The only team that really did it was the San Antonio Gunslingers, and they had a reputation as a hard-hitting team, which kind of makes sense considering that Dotch was a member of part of the Steel Curtain. So, yeah. The Stallions' first game of the 84 season was in front of a league record 62,500 fans at Legion Field against the reconstruction New Jersey Generals, with the Generals arriving in town under new owner Donald Trump, with running back Herschel Walker and quarterback Brian Sipe. Birmingham was super excited for the new season, especially playing that team, and it was broadcast on national television. But the Stallions ended up losing 17-6 to the Generals, so that does hurt. But it would mark the start of a 9-game unbeaten streak that they took into May 6th with a record of 9-1 against the 9-1 Stars in the biggest game since the opener. But once again, against a top team, the Stallions ended up looking lifeless as they ended the game 43-11 in favor of the Stars. And I guess it makes some sauce to the Stars that went on to win the title, I guess, but yeah. The game against them did draw 49,500 people, but once they lost that game as well, a lot of people didn't really go to the games as much, as for the rest of the year they only averaged 27,000 fans a game, which is still solid, but nowhere near as much as they did in those 2 big games. And yeah. And then they ended up going 14-4, but the decline of their fans was also viewed part on the USFL's decision to announce that they were going to go to the fall in 1986, which did hurt a lot of USFL teams. But yeah, the 14-4 record, though, did capture the Southern Division Championship, so they got to the playoffs. They beat the Memphis Showboats right before the season at a sold-out Liberty Bowl, but in the Eastern Conference semifinals, they ended up defeating the Tampa Bay Bandits in a 36-16 win in front of 32,000 fans. But then they lost the Eastern Conference Championship once again to the Stars. This time it was closer at 20-10, but it still hurts at the end of their season losing. As for how the team did in attendance and players in '84, attendance they did really well. They ended up finishing fourth out of an 18-team league, which is really nice, having 36,850 fans a game, which is a really insane number. And then in terms of their players, they only had a couple guys that were on the teams, but they were still solid. Once again, Buddy Adelet was on both the All-Star and All-League team. Tackle Pat Phoenix was on the All-League team, and then Joe Cribbs, their running back, was on both the All-League and All-Star team. As for the 1985 season, it came right after a season where they were just one game away from the title game. But during the middle of the season, the team was almost completely derailed as the Tampa Bay Bandits co-owner Steve Arkai got raided and shut down by the Securities and Exchange Commission. And then, after his subsequent suicide, it triggered a massive run in Home State Savings Bank, the Cincinnati-based savings and Icon Warner controlled, resulting in its seizure by Ohio regulators. So yeah, with most of the money tied up to either Home State or the Stallions, Warner was forced to give up control of the team days after it happened, and the league had required its owners to post $1.3 million letter of credit for just such an emergency. And then the Stallions' $1.3 million letter of credit was backed by Home State, rendering it pretty much worthless. So in response, their team president, Jerry Schuyler, urged the Stallions' limited partners to chip in more money and persuaded the city government to buy a $100,000 stake in the team along with a $900,000 credit line. Because of that, it allowed the Stallions to stay in business and remain in Birmingham for the rest of the year. So more or less out of necessity, the Stallions exercised more fiscal responsibility in '85 and only made a couple minor upgrades, with the only notable addition being defensive tackle Doug Smith, who was a second-round pick of the Oilers in '84, and he was a territorial pick. And he only signed there because he couldn't get a contract agreement with the Oilers. So after acquiring the first overall pick in the '85 draft, the Stallions decided to make a pick on a certain receiver by the name of Jerry Rice. Now, naturally, Rice decided to go to the NFL, but it is important to note that the fact that Jerry Schuyler and their coach were able to find his talent, as many NFL teams viewed him as a project receiver, whereas the Stallions just said, hey, you know what, he's the best. So now, with the USFL going from 18 to 14 teams, they were able to get some other guys from, teams that went away and stuff. They got safety David Dumars from the Gold, Phil McKinley from the Showboats, Ken Kelly from the Blitz, and defensive back Mikey Sutton from the Maulers. And then they opened the season by hosting the Generals again at Legion Field. The game featured the debut of Doug Flutie, the 1984 Heisman winner. And then in front of 34,700 fans, the Stallions ended up winning that game 38-28 to mark a season that seemed like it would be better. They jumped to a 5-1 record to start the season and then finished the regular season on a 9-1 clip. They ended up claiming the Eastern Conference title and the 2 seed in the playoffs with a 13-5 record. Only the Oakland Invaders had a better record in '85 with a 13-4-1 record. Cliff Stout, their quarterback, had a pretty solid season, 3,300 yards, 34 touchdowns, but he did have 19 picks. And then that 34 touchdown passes was second in the league, only behind Jim Kelly's 39. Stout's primary target in '85 was receiver Jim Smith, who had a career year recording 20 touchdown catches. And then Smith ended up catching 87 passes for a league-leading 1,300 yards and was, of course, on the USFL All-Star team. Running back Joe Cribbs had his second consecutive 1,000-yard season and had a solid year. Safety Chuck Clinton had a professional football record with 16 interceptions in '85, and he had 275 yards and a major picking off passes. So yeah, pretty good. The NFL record, though, of 14 was done by Night Train Lane in like a 12-game season, so just know that. And then the CFL record of 15 was in a season from Al Brenner of the Calgary Stampeders. Yeah, once again, different league. In the USFL quarterfinal, the Stallions defeated the visiting Houston Gamblers 22-20 at Legion Field. And then at the following week, they ended up hosting the defending champion Baltimore Stars at Legion Field. And they were hoping to get revenge, but like most USFL teams, they could not match the Stars, and the Stars won 28-14. And then as for how some of the players in attendance did, the attendance in 85 still was solid. They finished fourth again, this time out of 14 teams, having 32,065 fans, which showed that even with the league moving to the fall, they still were going to have a decent fan base. And as their players, they had a lot of players. Raleigh Dodge was Coach of the Year on both the All-Star and All-League team. Jerry Schuyler was the Executive of the Year on the All-Star team. And then in terms of the players, Jim Smith was on both the All-League and All-Star team. Buddy Idolet, for a third straight year, was on both the All-Star and All-League team. Pat Sandon was on both the All-Star and All-League team. Safety Chuck Clinton was on both the All-Star and All-League team. And then Doug Smith, defensive tackle, and linebacker Herb Spencer were both on the All-Star team, which overall meant them pretty solid. As for the team's all-time leaders in single season and career, they're all the same, as their receiving leader was Jim Smith, who in 84 had 1,600 receiving yards, by the way, which is a USFL record. And then their rushing leader was Joe Cribbs, who had 1,467 yards in 84, and Cliff Stout, who had 3,100 passing yards in 85, ended up being their all-time leader in passing as well. So, pretty simple. As for how the players did and who were the notable guys, we're going to start with Reggie Collie, their starting quarterback their first year. He played for the Stallions that year, then he played for the Federals, who became the Renegades. Then he played 1 year with the Cowboys, 1 year with the Steelers. Then in 91, which is 4 years after his Steelers, he went to the Arena Football League and played for the Orlando Predators. Then in 93, played for the Albany Firebirds. Really weird career. Because the Federals moved, technically he didn't stay more than 1 year with the team. And so his 1,900 yards in the Arena Football League and 200 yards in the NFL make him one of the weirder careers we've seen. Their second quarterback, Cliff Stout, their all-time leader in passing yards. He's a two-time champ, being the backup to Terry Bradshaw. He was there from 77 to 83 in the Steelers. Then he was with the Stallions for 2 years. Then he went to the St. Louis/Phoenix Cardinals from 86 to 88. The Dolphins a year and the Cowboys a year. He ended his career with 4,700 passing yards and a career touchdown to interception ratio that is just terrible in 23 to 43. Now, in terms of the guys who were on the All-League or All-Star team, it's weird, but let's just start with the team president, Jerry Schuyler. He was part of the reason why the team got saved. His decision-making during that time when their owner, had to forfeit the team. He did kind of save them, and he's Executive of the Year. So, I guess there's that. And then we have Mike Reines, who was an All-Star member in 83. He played for the 49ers for a year, then the Montreal Alouettes, then the Ottawa Rough Riders for 75 till 82, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers also in 82, then he went to the Birmingham Stallions, then the Jacksonville Bulls, and then the Houston Gamblers. 3 different teams, 3 different years in the USFL. Mainly known as a CFL star, but I guess there's that. Then their head coach, Raleigh Dodge, who was a Coach of the Year in 85. As a head coach, he would go 33-15-1 in college, and then 36-18 in the USFL, and I guess 7-7-2 in high school. The only other team he really coached for that was a while was Northern Michigan, where he coached for a few years in the late 60s. So, yeah, overall, an okay coach, mainly just USFL coach. Chuck Clinton, he would play with the Stallions, and then he would end up playing, that's pretty much it. He just played for the Stallions. Credit where credit's due, the guy had 16 interceptions, which is technically the most in professional football league. So, pretty solid. As for Herb Spencer, their linebacker who was an all-league member, he played all 3 years with the Stallions, and then afterward he'd play 1 year with the Atlanta Falcons. Doug Smith, nose tackle, played for the Houston Oilers after 1983, and he would play with them from 84 to 92, which, pretty solid. He did play, and he was a member of 101 games, though he only recovered for 14 sacks. Pat Phoenix, he would end up playing for them all 3 years as one of their just starting tackles. Just okay. Pat Sandon would be a member of the Saints and Falcons for 1 year each. And then wide receiver Jim Smith, the guy who had the most receiving yards in a single season in the USFL. He ended up going to the Los Angeles Raiders in 85, which is where he'd end his career. And beforehand, he was a member of the Steelers for the last 2 Super Bowls, just like Rolly Doach. He was there from 77 to 82. In the NFL, he only had 2,000 yards, but he did have 25 touchdowns, which is pretty solid. And then in terms of the guys who were all league or all-time members, they had 2 guys who were second team all-time. And one of them is kind of surprisingly Buddy Idolette. You'd expect that he would be first team considering he was a member of the All-Star and All-League team literally all 3 years, which is really rare, but he wasn't. So after the Stallions, he played for the Steelers 1 year, and before he played for the Packers 1 year. He only ever started 5 NFL games, mainly just a USFL legend. And then last but not least is running back Joe Cribbs, who played for 4 years for the Bills in the early 80s, went to the Stallions, went back to the Bills 1 year, went to the Niners for 2 years, the Colts, and the Dolphins. He actually was a 3-time Pro Bowler, all with the Bills, and had 5,000 yards in the NFL, which is pretty solid. So, I mean, the only thing really to say about him is that he was just okay. So, overall, in terms of this team, it's a weird team to look at and think that they were so successful when they really didn't have the most NFL caliber talent. Because, like, a lot of these teams will have at least one dude who ended up becoming, like, a legend in, like, the Arena Football League or the Canadian Football League or even just a Pro Bowler in the NFL. Yet, this team really didn't have that. Most of their guys just peaked in the USFL or never did anything else, which is really weird. And it's a credit to Rolly Doach for actually being able to get their team to the playoffs 2 years and get close to a title game both times. It's just, they never did. So, next time is going to be the last video of this series, unless you guys want me to do teams that aren't coming back, as next time is going to be the Philadelphia/Baltimore Stars, the team that, pretty much ruled the league. If you enjoy this content and want to be notified as soon as I upload, hit the subscribe button and then hit the bell so you'll be notified as soon as I upload. And also remember to have a great night.